Hello and welcome to another episode of Virtual Coffee with Ashish. Today, we're talking about from a CISO perspective, and I have an interesting guest. But before we go into this, if you're watching this for the first time, we release every video every week on our YouTube channel and on our LinkedIn page for Cloud Security Podcast. And if you are someone who enjoys conversations like these, feel free to subscribe and follow on your favorite podcast platform, as well as the video platform. So before I get into it, I need to thank someone who has made this possible. Exonius has been our season sponsor for the second season of Cloud Security Podcast, and no one talks about Exonius better than Nathan. So let me bring him in.
Hey, Ashish and Cloud Security Podcast listeners. Thanks for giving Exonius the opportunity to sponsor the show. Exonius does exactly three things. By connecting to existing data sources, Exonius gives customers a comprehensive asset inventory, both cloud and on-prem. It then uncovers security gaps, and finally, it automatically validates and enforces policies. Thanks again, and check us out at exonius.com.
Thank you, Nathan. So now it's time to bring my guest. Oh, welcome, Angie.
I love that song.
You Want It Darker, it is. So for people who want to check out the song, You Want It Darker, and there's a tradition over here. First of all, thank you for coming in. I hope I appreciate you got the liquid elixir.
Yep.
Cheers. Thank you for coming in. So what are you having, first of all?
Well, the joy of Zoom is you have no idea if this is a gin and tonic or just sparkling water with lime. So you can pretend it's either one.
Yeah, I'm gonna definitely, considering you just came back from Israel, looking at your LinkedIn post recently on the flight, I'm assuming it's gin and tonic, so you can keep away.
Hendrix would be my favorite choice most of the time as an easy go-to to do gin and tonic. But you got to do Fever Tree tonic. Really goes nicely with it.
Fever Free tonic.
And that was not a paid spot. Those are really just my choices.
Oh, perfect. I need to check those out. But first of all, congratulations on being the CISO Hall of Fame winner for 2021.
Thank you.
Great, what an honor. And I think it's one of those ones where you don't like. I think I've been connected with you. We have a couple of conversations on Clubhouse as well. And it was really interesting that once I started digging into online stalking you, I guess, for lack of a better word, I realized that wow, you have such an interesting background, and you would probably want to shed some light on that as well as we go through this. So 21 years in Akamai, and before we get into any of that and how you've kind of saw cybersecurity change, I would love to get the audience to know a bit about yourself. So if you can tell us a bit about Andy Elias, and I guess how did he reach the whole CISO spot?
Yeah, so I guess it's one of those really long and strange journeys, and conveniently I have it documented here. So I actually used to work at Disneyland a long time ago. That's actually the Spirit of Disneyland award that I was did costume issue, like gave people their clothing. And I remember at the time, one of the things we were doing was moving from a paper-based system where you like wrote down what people had to a mainframe system. And I hacked the system in the good term of hacking. There were these unused function keys. And like there were these places where we kept typing in the same things over and over again. And so I found the little macro programmer where you could program the function keys to like type in anything else. And so I literally went to every computer and did this because I'm like, I'm tired of waiting for the screens. And I did it. And then one day somebody saw me pushing the button and they're like, what is that? So like I had to document it, and then a supervisor finds out that I've done this, and they couldn't decide whether to reprimand me or award me something. But yeah, so like that, you could almost say that might have been the early start of it. A little later, I actually worked in the hospitality industry. My family owned an inn in Vermont, and actually this is the Award of Excellence from the Wine Spectator for the wine cellar that I managed. So normally I actually would be doing wine here, but I am a little jet lagged, so that's why I went with something a little bit different today. And that's, again, that's an art, being a bartender or wine steward, where it's all about learning someone's story and telling them a story and fitting into what they want. If somebody walks in and says, can you recommend a wine? You have to figure out how much money they're willing to spend.
Yep.
right? Because you can't just say, oh, pick this wine. And if it's an expensive wine, they're going to look at you like, oh, you're just trying to rip me off. But on the other hand, if they're coming in planning on spending a couple $100 on a bottle of wine, you probably don't want to recommend a $34 bottle, because then they're going to be like, come on, what are you doing to me? After I graduated from MIT, I went into the Air Force. I have my Air Force Commendation Medal. Oops, over on that side. That was actually where I really got into serious operational security. I did information warfare for Central Command. Responsible for mostly defensive operations, although our unit did work both sides of the house there. And when I got out, I came to Akamai, where I spent 21 years. That's my 20-year plaque. I got it just before I left. Doing every job in security, from security engineering, security architecture, compliance management, sales support, product development, product marketing. You name it, I've probably done the job in information security and in physical security too. I actually once was a security guard at a condo complex. I literally walked a beat, making sure people had locked their doors when it was a vacation place. So like on Monday, you'd go make sure all the doors were locked.
Interesting. So, wow, such a varied. So from Disneyland to bartending to working at Akamai. Really interesting. And you went through different roles in cybersecurity as well. Like you start, well, you make me jealous. You started like way, way, way earlier. And I almost feel like that's really interesting how some of the experiences you may have seen from being a security engineer to all the way to the CISO. And by the way, thank you for your service as well for the Air Force. I was also going to say, I remember the Air Force conversation reminded me of your conversation about relationship between safety and secure the site to a lame person versus the military. Can you shed some light on that?
Oh, yeah. So I always love words like secure and safe because they have no common meaning. And there was this anecdote that Caspar Weinberger used to tell, who was the Secretary of Defense in the US. And he said, he was asked, like, what was the hardest part of his job? And it was like finding the right tool to solve a problem. He said, look, I can give orders and the military will go execute my orders. But if I tell somebody to go secure a building, if I tell the Army to secure the building, they're going to put up concertina wire and sandbags, and they'll have password of the day to show up, and maybe they'll have zones of enfilading fire. So if you try to rush the building, they'll kill you. The Marines, they're just going to get right to the point. They'll kill everybody inside the building and probably blow it up for good measure. If you ask the Navy to secure the building, they're going to turn off all the lights, close and latch all the windows, and lock the door on the way out, and the building's been secured. And the Air Force will give me a 3-year lease with an option to buy. And that's really always stuck with me, because people will say things like, I'm building this system. Is it safe? And I'm like, what does safe mean? Because it means so many different things to different people. And I actually think that security is a sub-discipline of safety. And it's the sub-discipline that most safety experts pretend doesn't exist, which is often problematic. So it gets excluded from safety conversations. Safety is just making sure that your system does not enter into a state where it will have an unacceptable loss based on triggering some hazard in the system. And so your goal is minimize hazards, protect against triggers. And security is the exact same thing, except it's when an adversary triggers it. Right? Think about, like, imagine you had like a big red button to shut down a system. And that big red button, like, you'd say, oh, look, we're going to put it in our NOC. We're going to protect it with like, a flip cover so you can't accidentally hit it. Those will all be safety controls. But if you put that button on the outside of the NOC with no security around it, where anybody could walk up and push the button, you still have a safety problem. Like, the system could turn off when you really don't want it to, but it's an adversarial one. So now it's a security problem.
I loved it, and I definitely wanted you to share that with my audience as well, because I think the Cloud Security Podcast audience definitely appreciate this. And considering it's Cloud Security Podcast as well, one question that we ask every guest is, like, what does cloud security mean for you?
It's like 5 different disciplines. I'll probably lose track as I go through, so my apologies if you're trying to figure out which 5 I listed. So one piece of it is, how do you secure inside an infrastructure as a service environment? And that's a really interesting question, because when you think about normal IT security pre-cloud, what often happened is somebody else provided security outside your device for you. Like you said, oh, I need a web server, and IT provided you a server that they were hardening and they were patching, and they'd installed a backup server and 17 agents on it. It made your web server slow, but at least it was relatively secure. And maybe they stuck a WAF and a load balancer, and they did all of these things for you. And now you go and you say, oh, I need a web server. Hey, I go to Amazon. I'm like, yeah, give me a web server. Well, nobody's doing all that for you. Like Amazon provides a lot of the capabilities to do it, but they don't do it for you. Right? And so a piece of cloud security is literally, how do you just do IT security off premises, where your IT is not the intermediary to make sure you set it up. So that's one aspect of cloud security. Another aspect, which is really the business I was in at Akamai, is how do you deliver security capabilities through a cloud-based system? We did DDoS defense, where we're doing the DDoS away from your network. Like that's where we were going to eat it, because if we let the DDoS get into your premises, you were already in trouble. Same thing. How do you deliver WAF out at the edge? That's sort of another way to think about cloud security. Then, of course, there's how are you doing security for how you use the cloud, which isn't just infrastructure as a service. That's also software as a service. So do you know even what software as a service platforms you have set up? Are those integrated into your standard controls? And then that has sort of sub-split outs that you would look at, like what data is in your cloud environments, and how do you know that your SaaS players aren't sharing it with one another in a way that you really didn't want them to? So I guess I only went through 4 there. There's probably a 5th one I'll remember later.
Wow. No, but that's actually a very interesting way to put it, because to your point, I love the one where you called out, it's doing IT security off premise.
Yep.
And a lot of people don't even, and I think this is kind of where a lot of people throw the whole shared responsibility model as well. And people go into this. But I love how you kind of went through different layers as well of, hey, I may need a WAF, I need something else, which kind of makes me question, like, because clearly you've been, I guess, with the CISO Hall of Fame and the 21 years that you've done already. Offline, we were talking about the whole SSO conversation. So you may have seen quite a few changes, which a lot of us take as given. Like I obviously use the SSO example. Like right now, if you talk to anyone, they talk about, hey, we should single sign on this. I don't know why we're trying to keep remembering credentials and blah, blah, blah. And I could not imagine a time when this is like requiring convincing to people. So keen to know from you, from when you started to now, what are some of the things that you used to convince people on, hey, we should do this? I'm sure multi-factor authentication is still there as well, but what are some of the things that are, I guess, coming up to your mind on that one?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, single sign-on was a huge one. I remember when we installed Pub Cookie was how we did single sign-on. Like, that's a package. I don't know if it even exists anymore, if anybody uses it, because I think we were one of the last enterprises that still used it. And it was a fight because people were like, why do I want to integrate my web server with some other web server? Like, I can just do Active Directory or LDAP-based authentication right here. So that was a big challenge. Just getting people to think about doing, building from an already hardened image. It used to be that when you built systems, you would just like take stock off the shelf, possibly in Slackware, something, and you'd install it, and then you would go and say, okay, how do I harden it? I'd go take Bastille or something else, and I'd run it here. And like now, that just seems so foolish. Like, why would you do that to an operating system? Now, right. We have the stripped down version, and then we install and only add the packages that we want. So those are probably 2 really big ones that stand out to me. But some of it is just, it happens so gradually. The conversations about network segmentation. Sorry, we're supposed to say zero trust these days. I mean, that's now the new thing. So in 10 years, everybody's going to take for granted that, of course, you do micro segmentation and you do app-based authentication for everything. But that wasn't even on anybody's radar 20 years ago. Like, if you tried to talk about doing that, we didn't have any devices that would support network segmentation at line rate.
Interesting. So what do you think that kind of changed? Because I know how a lot of people talk about, hey, security is not enabling business, but clearly single sign-on is a clear sign that it was enabling business. As an individual who's probably working in a company with over 300 applications, I don't have to remember 300 passwords because one of the security policies is to have unique passwords everywhere.
Oh,
Like totally enabling business.
No, I actually think 90% of security is enabling business, but it's only enabling business if you don't tack it on. So much of the time we're playing this catch-up game that somebody has already deployed something and they've deployed the leanest, fastest thing they can do. And so of course you're going to get in the way of the business now to make that more secure. But if you didn't just have to tack on the minimal security, you can say, well, what do we build? So let's take single sign-on, for instance. We were deploying that at Akamai, and it was fantastic. We'd moved over, and we put our cloud in front of everything. So we said, rather than even making your app integrate backwards to single sign-on, we're just going to have a front end do it for you. And so if you don't need any authorization other than, is this an Akamai employee, don't worry about it, because the only thing that can talk to you is our cloud service, and it has already validated that it's an Akamai employee. Like, boom, instantly we could take any website. It didn't have to have TLS, and we could bump it up to a TLS front end that was doing authentication, and people loved that. But then we're working on this. We said, we were doing X509 cert plus password, and we decided we were going to add push-based auth using Duo. And we were really worried about rolling that out. And then all of a sudden we said, our goal is 2-factor authentication, and we're about to add 3 factors. So why don't we get rid of passwords? So
what? You went passwordless.
We went passwordless. Like, there's a cert on your laptop, and it's and it pushes to your phone to make sure it's you. You had to type a password into each one of those. Why do I need a 3rd password?
Wait. So we're definitely going into zero trust territory now. So and network segmentation. So I know you did some implementation of this, and I'm keen to know, how do you explain zero trust to people when, obviously keeping the buzzword aside, how do you explain zero trust?
I think zero trust is a principle, or a set of principles. We used to call it least privilege in some senses. What it really says is, don't assume anything that you don't have to. So just because somebody's on your network doesn't mean they're legitimate. Just because you've talked to this person before doesn't mean you're still allowed to talk to them. Those are 2 principles you might think about. So it's make sure that every request is authenticated. And so that means usually doing requests up at the application layer. It's minimize network connectivity. So in the old world, like, a user was connecting to the HTTP port or HTTPS port on a web server, they could probably connect to SSH. But why? Mm-hmm. There's no reason. It's just a user. So how do you even segment at the protocol? So it's not just about IP segmentation, it's also protocol segmentation. So I look at it that way, say, how do I make sure that every time a user does a thing, that we've authenticated as simply as possible that user? And I think the biggest change that we did, my philosophy difference, is there are no more people on the internet. There are cyborgs. And this sounds kind of wacky and weird, but here's the difference. The keyboard isn't the perimeter anymore. Right? People think about, how does the user authenticate to the computer? Forget about that. If you're out in the network somewhere, that's not the point of authentication you care about. To you, the computer is part of the person. Right?
Yep.
If I'm authenticated
the device,
to the computer, that's my device. Like, that's my boundary. So you just need to authenticate at the edge of my boundary, and you just want to authenticate in 2 places and say, let's check 2 devices that you have control of. But look, if somebody's here with a gun to my head and I've had to unlock both of my devices, yes, that person gets to emulate who I am. There's nothing we can do at this point to then sort of protect against that model. But that's the model that some people are like, oh my goodness, we have to always test when they're logging into this laptop. But if you do that, you create so many vulnerabilities on that laptop. If this laptop trusts somebody outside of me to log in and run anything, this laptop is no longer trustworthy to anyone.
Love it. I love it. And I think it's really interesting, because that challenges the norm again that we have kind of gotten used to, that, hey, any employee should be able to, I think the word that they use is floating users, or whatever they call it. Basically, Andy is able to log into my laptop. I'm able to log into my laptop. Awful. Anyone can log into anyone's laptop.
It's awful. Like, especially given what computers cost these days, like, laptops are tied to human beings in 99% of enterprises anyway. So just make that part of the system, make the laptop part of the user's environment, and cut out as much administrative access as you can. In fact, I would actually advocate that Apple does a better job of securing my computer than almost any other enterprise can. And so we should rely on Apple's updates and say, hey, here's some software that might improve it. But if I have an agent running here that somebody else can log into, that's how ransomware propagates. Just takes over the agents.
Yep. Amazing. And I think another thing that I want to touch on, and we've kind of jumped into the zero trust model, which I love it. I feel like I should bring you in again to do a whole episode on zero trust. Will be definitely valuable. I do wanted to get into some of the challenges that you have faced across your 20 years of history as well, and I'm sure it would have varied at different stages. Single sign-on clearly with the X509 certificate, like using a certificate to authenticate a device. So clearly, you've done like a huge breadth of this. I was curious, as a CISO, if you can share some of the good, bad, and ugly of being, I guess, working as a CISO for a security company, because I imagine that's a different kind of challenge in itself.
So it definitely is, especially a company that wasn't security when I started, but we made it into a security company.
Wait, it wasn't a cybersecurity company?
Akamai was a CDN. We did delivery of objects. Our very first product literally was, if you went to a website, all of the images on it had their URLs rewritten. So the image tags, instead of being, yoursite.com, said, a17.g.akamai.net/ had like 3 things, and then / yoursite.com and wherever the original thing was. Literally, we just did on-demand caching of objects. That was our very first product. And the whole idea was, like, you had a website, and if you had a flash crowd, all you had to deliver was the HTML, and we would deliver the objects. That was our first product.
Right. So what made that shift to a security company?
So when we moved to the next product after that, which was called Edge Suite, and that was the one where you CNAMEd a domain to us, and we would deliver the HTML. Like, we just did that just to deliver the HTML. Mm-hmm. And then we looked at it and we said, there are these events that keep happening that look a lot like DDoS attacks. They're called flash crowds. Like, whether it's, somebody has a hot sale or a big news event, like, we were protecting websites by offloading all of this traffic. And we said, what if there's a security service there? Could we just do DDoS mitigation? And so we launched that product. I was actually the de facto product manager for it, because we didn't have one. So the head of sales looked at me. They'd assigned me a junior product manager at the time to work on it. And we're going to launch this at our sales kickoff. And the day before, like, there's going to be a senior product manager is launching every other product. And he comes up and he says, Andy, you're the one getting up on stage. And I'm like, but you have a product manager. And he's looking at me and he's like, he's not going to cut it. This is your job. So I had to get up on stage and, like, introduce the product and launch the product with our sales force. And then along the way, it's like, we needed to build a secure product, not a security product, just to be able to do financial transactions. And then we're doing compliance, and we start developing these features, and we build tokenization. So if you were doing credit card tokenization, rather than the credit card entering into your enterprise to get tokenized, we would just abduct it, basically. Somebody would post a credit card. We would take the credit card number, use the tokenization API of whoever you're using for tokenizing, get the token back, and only send you the token. So a credit card never entered your infrastructure, took you entirely out of PCI scope. That was a fun product for a while. And then people decided they would do their own tokenization. They didn't really want to rely on third-party tokenizers. So it didn't really help that we would pull it off for them. But so we just kept adding these features. And at some point, it's like, okay, we added a WAF during Operation Payback. Operation Ababa, we built out more DDoS defense capabilities. And our security revenue just kept growing faster and faster, because we had this one thing we could do. I could walk in, and what's the hardest part about selling a security technology in the non-cloud world is that it slows everything down, right?
Yep. I remember the antivirus updates as well. Jesus,
right. You put in a WAF, and the WAF makes your website break, because WAF vendors don't understand websites. We understood websites. So we would walk in and say, we have a cloud-based WAF that will speed up your website. And people just didn't believe it. They're like, how does that work? And I'm like, I built it on top of this amazing performance service. And it sold like hotcakes. And now when people think about WAF, how many people think about buying a box for a WAF?
Not many.
Like, cloud is the default. But we were the first people to really be selling that commercially with any success.
Interesting. And worthwhile calling out, this is probably one of those examples as well where a lot of CISOs or security leaders listening to this may be considering, hey, my company is primarily, I don't know, in retail or something else completely. And changing that into like, hey, you could actually have a security product. Like you could become a product manager in your own company, come up with the product for the whatever the company may be, whatever industry they may be in. There could be a security product angle there.
Yeah, and that's the way I looked at my job, is that every day my job was to get rid of whatever I was doing. That if I had something that I was doing over and over again, how do I get rid of that work? How do I hire somebody to do it? Because once I know how to do it, I can teach somebody else to do it. That my value was doing things nobody else had ever done. Right?
That's pretty awesome. And I think it definitely is very interesting to kind of bring up on the fact that the conversation that people have about security not contributing to revenue, it being an expense, like it kind of is not true if we allow. I mean, it's only true if we allow it to be true. I guess we can definitely look at options like that. So
there are times where you are literally just spending money. Just to be clear, like there isn't some silver bullet that says like go find this thing and then you'll have no budget woes. I still had budget woes, but on the bright side, I had budget woes in a growing company where we were growing, and the fastest growing line of business was one that I'd innovated.
Perfect. And I love the answer, because that makes me beg the question now. I guess there's obviously now in a pandemic world, and CISO's role, I guess, is more remote and more zero trust conversation getting popular. What do you think are some of the changes that you've seen in the industry that have been brought because of COVID, I guess, which maybe CISOs are facing as challenges, and you may have seen them as well?
Yeah, so I think it really varies where people were. For me, COVID really was a non-event. I mean, personally, it was a huge event, just to be very clear.
Yeah.
But we had designed our system to support remote and distributed work. The biggest challenge was around the norms of having meetings and conversations and what would we do. But we had built our system for remote work. But I've talked to CISOs that they had never let an employee work from home, ever. Like they didn't have laptops. They had desktops because they were cheaper. Nobody could work from home. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, you have to support employees working from home. I knew people who basically were furloughed for 3 months while their company argued about whether they would support them in working from home. Other people who had to buy legacy equipment because they're like, I got a VPN, but it was only designed for 10% of the company, and now it's 100%. So I have to go buy every one of these outdated systems. And I talked to one he was one of the first people to figure that out. And so he found every single one on the market and he bought them all.
And great businessman.
I'm not going to be able to get them anywhere else. And then he didn't use any of them. He might have made some friends by hooking them up and selling them on the side. I don't know if it was a business line. But it does remind me of, like, for a while, the American, and it was American Airlines that innovated the buying oil futures. That for a long time, American Airlines made its entire profit was on reselling jet fuel to other airlines, and then all the airlines now do that. So if you actually look at many of the airlines, a lot of their money is in commodities trading.
Really?
Yeah, because like they've got they don't want to be subject to like a spike in jet fuel prices today, so they're going to buy it out in advance. And now I don't know all the details of it, but like that's the sort of example of somebody thinking outside the box and saying, we're not just an airline, we're an integrated supply chain.
And to your point, it kind of goes back to the having a security product as, like, if that's where your expertise is, you could look at that opportunity that there might be a security opportunity even in midst of COVID as well somewhere. Hey, how do we do the remote work, but not just do it for ourselves, but make it a service that we make available to other people as well?
Yeah, so think about like how many people are podcasting more maybe than they were before, or have amazing equipment. Like literally, I did not have a sound room like this a year and a half ago. Like this was built during COVID so that I could do conferences and meet with customers and have like this better audio quality.
Yeah, and I love it. But do you reckon the role as per se of a CISO has that changed? Like what makes according to you, what makes it a successful role? Like, what kind of qualities does someone need to make it a successful, I guess, be a successful CISO?
So it's really, again, going to depend on the environment. And I know I've said that like 7 times, but I don't think I can say it too many times. So that's one piece of it. But you have to recognize that as a CISO, you are not a technician. It's okay to have technical expertise. I have some amazing technical expertise, although I have some people who will tell you it's merely mediocre. That's okay, because it doesn't matter how deep it is. What's going to limit you is, do you understand how processes work? Can you design them? Can you understand how to work with people? You know, we talk often about hard skills and soft skills. I hate those phrases. I just use them as touchstones. There's technical skills, which is how you change the world through your own willpower. There's people skills, which is how you convince other people to change the world for you. And there's process skills, which is the hardest, which is how do you convince people that you're never going to meet to continue to change the world on your behalf? And those are powerful skills that you really need to understand. You're going to roll out some new initiative, and you have to understand, how is everybody in the company going to react to this new program? And how many of them are going to sabotage it because it's a disaster that doesn't understand them?
Yep. Imagine rolling out 2FA to everyone. It's like, for the first time in a company that's never done 2FA before. That would be, because that doesn't require technical skill. Because I guess the technical part of it's super easy.
That's the easy part. Like, now it's the process of, you got to roll it out. But what we found is that because we rolled it out in a way that made it easier for our users, it was our users that would actually force the rollout for us. When somebody would stand up a new web service, and they just connected Active Directory to it, I would get an email probably within 2 or 3 days from one of our other architects, because he'd have to log into it. He'd be like, "Andy, why did you let this system get stood up?" And I'm sitting here going, "I didn't know this system existed." Like that to me. But now I can go chase that down. Right? And I'd go look, and I'd just reach out to a VP and I'd say, "Hey, I don't know what your folks are doing, but here's the way to do it right." And they'd be like, "Okay, great. I'll go take care of it."
There you go. Well,
and that's because I understood the people in the process. The technical was the easy part.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you called out the people, process, technology part as well. And I'm gonna switch gears a bit as well, because I think outside of just being a CISO for Akamai, now you've kind of changed roles as well, and you've kind of switched into the whole operating partner model for a VC fund. Can you just tell us a bit about that as well?
Sure. So I love my job. I'm basically an executive without portfolio inside a portfolio of companies. So my job is to make them successful. Once we've invested money in a company, and we have 10 or 11 companies in our portfolios right now, my job is help them be successful, whatever that looks like. I was just in Israel, meeting with the head of HR for one of them. That was the only reason I was there. But sitting down just to walk through, how do you build a strong U.S. presence? How do we build culture? Because it's a small, tight-knit Israeli group, and then everybody in the U.S. is working in a different city. And it's fantastic. They can hire people wherever they need to, but there isn't a U.S. office. And they're very worried about culture. So I'm sitting in as an HR consultant, because that's what would be helpful there. I would meet with product managers and talk about, what should be the next feature on their roadmap. And, they'd walk through the roadmap and then grill me. I sit down and I get the sales pitch. Every one of our companies gives me their sales pitch, and I am brutal. I'm probably the hardest person they're going to give the sales pitch to, because I'm going to critique everything about the pitch. How do I make it better so that the next CISO who walks in won't be like, "Oh, I don't like that, but I'm not going to tell them." Right? I don't want to have that moment. So I would rather, and literally I've done things like, you have the same image on 2 slides and they're a pixel apart. And I noticed, you clicked forward and the image just moved a little bit. You got to fix that. And they're like, "How did you notice that?" And I'm like, "Because I noticed that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So anything from, engineering. I'm not writing code for anybody, because nobody needs me to write code anymore. But I love this job. And we don't have that many companies under our portfolio. We're a seed round venture capital firm. So for those who don't understand how sort of venture capital works, basically you give people money across the course of their growth. So seed is the first round, and then they're basically labeled A through whatever. Hopefully you don't get into like M. And so what happens is, you sell part of your company in exchange for money. And so we'll
Yep.
give people, some amount of money. We get ownership of part of the company. Our job is to make them grow. And as a seed round venture capital firm, we're not investing in companies. We're investing in people so they can build companies. And so our job is to help them build the company. And so we provide marketing support, business development, researchers. So if they say, hey, we're interested in that addressable market, we have some amazing researchers in Israel who will go, research the market, figure out who all the competitors are, go talk to CISOs to figure out, what do they really care about in that market, and write them a research report. That's just because they're part of our portfolio. That's not like an added service. That's just value add for how we're going to get them to be a leader in their market.
So, and that's really interesting. And worthwhile calling out why you've been specifically calling out Israel, because I think so. The company focuses on Israel seed round startups, right?
Yep, that's our focus is Israeli cybersecurity firms.
Perfect. And because we definitely have like a huge community in Israel as well. So I'm sure they're listening in. Some of them or most of them may have already got a startup as well. And from are these companies like security companies, or are they like the ones that you're advising to, or are they non-security?
Yeah, so the ones I'm working with are generally all security. I think we have one non-security active company in our portfolio, which is Ride Vision, which actually I think is sort of a safety company. It's about providing vision assistance for motorcycle operators to tell them what's in their blind spot, and it has fascinating user experience issues. It's not like you can give them a computer screen because read while they're riding. So I love Ride Vision; they're fun, but almost everybody else is in the security space because that's where we have the expertise. We're going to introduce them to our advisors. We have 100 CISOs who are advisors to the fund. So that, and part of the thing is there, we'll say, oh, hey, we think this is interesting, and help them with that.
But to your point, if it's cybersecurity companies and it's CISOs advisors that are being given out, what I wanted to call out over here is because a lot of CISOs, when you kind of look at trajectory for a lot of CISOs, they kind of are CISO for a certain industry. You go on to become CISO for another industry. Like, I think that's usually the trajectory for a lot of CISOs in terms of if someone was to look at it and go, okay, what do I become next after a CISO? So the obvious path that I know of is kind of like this is probably not that heard of. So what made you go into this, and what's exciting about, I mean, you already mentioned being an executive without a portfolio, but what are some of the challenges in here that you see, which are probably not the same from that kind of enterprise?
Well, it's very different because I'm not actually responsible for anybody's security sort of other than my own, although it doesn't stop me from providing advice and guidance. But so I work with, the security teams or whoever's responsible for security, I'll talk with them, but that's not my principal role. My principal role is, how do I model what a CISO wants? So when we bring in companies, and I'll often meet with companies before we invest, I do help vet them. A number of our advisors also do that. And I look and say, is this something anybody's going to buy? Because if nobody's going to buy this from you, like, we obviously don't want to put money in it, because then we have to invest a lot of our time and energy in something that isn't going to change the world, which is ultimately what my mission is how do I make the world better? And I think this is a place where I can have an outsized impact, frankly, even more than the impact I had securing, planetary scale CDN, which I've already done. So it's not like, I have to start all over to do that.
Yeah, I think I'll definitely recommend people check out that talk that you did about incident response at a planetary scale. That was really interesting. Because people kind of forget for some of the scale that we solve in technology. Akamai, the whole content delivery network, where you're trying to have edge locations all over the world, and you're trying to manage it from a NOC center or SOC, and you're like, Jesus, this is like, it could be happening on the other side of the globe at any given point in time.
And you have crazy events that happen, and you're like, who did we just hurt? Like, you'd look up on a map because you'd get the name of some region that had an issue, and you had to go find them. Like, what is this? Just because I wanted to know, it's like, where is this country? And I thought I knew geography pretty well until it's like, oh, we have servers. For a while, we had them on 7 continents. And then it turns out it doesn't actually work well to have servers in Antarctica. So I think Akamai's back to 6 continents now.
Oh, fair enough. But to your point, now in this new role where obviously the challenges are slightly different, but starting a cybersecurity company, and I guess security is already on top of the list, but I'm assuming you've seen through a few already. What are some of the patterns that are standing out for you? Because I imagine the community who's listening to this, and specifically from the Israeli cybersecurity space, they might be going, are there obvious patterns that you may have seen that people are doing wrong? And just because clearly my problem is the best problem to solve.
Yeah, a lot of people have that. I'll sometimes see people who, they have this great idea, but it's for a space they've never worked in. And
right.
Like sometimes they think there's an easy solution because they're on the outside, and sometimes they're right, but a lot of times they're really wrong. But I think of security features as being like bricks that you're going to like build a city wall with. Much as I hate the city metaphor because the cloud looks nothing like a city, but let's just pretend for a moment.
Sure.
And say, if you're going to build a wall, there's really sort of 4 dimensions you care about, right? There's the linear length of the wall. Like, are you covering everything? And often I see people who don't think about that. They're like, oh, I have this brick. I'm like, sure, but if I have to put this brick on every piece of the wall all around, like think about like Exonius, right? That's what they do, is they find your entire wall for you. But if I have to argue with somebody every time I'm going to lay down a new brick, that's hard. Right? That's going to kill a security program if it's not easy to integrate at scale, right? So that's one area. Second area, I think of sort of that vertical thing, is about sort of how comprehensive is your security. Like if you're just selling me one brick, like I got a security feature, even if you could drop it on everything, like how much work do I have to do to add one brick in height? If I got 20 bricks instead, like that's more powerful than one brick. So things that have more comprehensive security coverage rather than just one thing. And then of course, like depth, think about the context. What's behind the wall? Like I don't want to build a 1,000-foot wall in front of like my daisies. I got a ton of daisies. Like I don't need to protect them from you. But where my treasury is, maybe I do want a really tall wall. So what's behind any piece of the wall? So that if the wall's thin, I know that matters and I should do something about it. And then of course, across time, you want to think about, how is continuity happening? Is this wall decaying? Is it growing better? Like, what am I going to have to do? A lot of security products that I've run into in my career lasted for 2 years. And then you had to rip it out and buy a new one. It's like
2 years. Wow.
Yeah, I kid you not, some of the threat intelligence things were like, oh yeah, put this in and it'll identify, but it basically had a hard-coded list of botnets. No botnet lasts that long.
No.
Then you were fooled, right? You bought it, and then 2 years later, they're like, oh, you should buy our upgraded service. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not followed for that one a second time.
Oh my God. Wait, so this kind of makes me think then, if people are trying to solve problems that may not have, that they may not have had themselves, it kind of makes me also question that, okay, it's great, but what are some of the good things? Like, well, I guess maybe I'm going to ask about the companies then. Are there 1 or 2 cloud security companies that are maybe in your portfolio that you may be excited about?
So I'm excited about all of them. It's one of those dangerous questions. It's like, do you have a favorite child? So I think I'm going to go for, I'll name 2 of them right now that I really enjoy. One of them people probably heard about, and one they might not have. So I'll go with the one you've probably heard about, which is Orca. So Orca Security is basically taking the problem of cloud. How do you secure in the cloud? So whether in AWS, Azure, or GCP, like you don't want to deploy an agent on everything. So they came up with a model that does side scanning. Connect into your admin interface, look at all the snapshots, and give you that context to tell you which vulnerabilities matter. Like you haven't updated 75 machines, but one of them has a database behind it that has PII in it. So maybe you should go update that one first because you have an imminent compromise. So that's one of my favorite ones, just because it's so easy to integrate and see value. Like it's not this cost to get lateral coverage. Another one, which a lot of folks haven't heard about, it's Medigate. They're a clinical zero trust network approach. That basically, the big challenge if you're in healthcare is in the clinical environment. You have PCs and you have medical devices that you can't update. And even just trying to understand like how you do your rules to do network segmentation is almost impossible. And so their model is basically they drop a virtual device or hardware into those networks. They map the whole network for you, and then they can do things like tell your vulnerability scanner, please don't scan those 5 machines because you really don't want that pacemaker to like reboot because you port scanned it. And so it's a really fantastic model, so very perfect for that healthcare clinical setting.
I'm definitely gonna check out both of them, but I think I love the one where you're talking about ease of integration is the key in both scenarios. It sounds like,
yeah,
and maybe this begs the question that a lot of CISOs may be listening to this and going, actually, how does someone get into the space that you are in? Like, were there specific skill sets that you had to? Obviously, you were doing a CISO role for some time already, but are there like specific skill set, or just being a CISO is good enough to start applying for these kind of roles?
So I think this is the sort of thing that if you said, hey, I wanted to do this role, I would recommend that you start about 5 years before starting to build towards. Same thing for anything. Like if you said today that you wanted to go to be a sports reporter, you wouldn't quit your job and go apply to be a sports reporter, right? You'd say, oh, I should start studying whatever sports I'm going to go do. I should be doing these things. Same thing.
Yep.
If you want to move to the VC world, then you start working in the VC world, doing something a little gentler. So like I mentioned that we have like 100 advisors. I used to be one of those advisors. I've been doing it for 4 years. And so I sort of was always demonstrating that I could provide value here, that I could meet with these companies and they would say, oh man, this is great value. And hey, we want Andy to be a direct advisor to this company. So I'm an advisor directly to a number of the portfolio companies even before I became an operating partner. So that sort of is what you need to do, because in this space, people here, they are very fast moving. They really want to know that you're going to bring value, that this isn't really a retirement gig, even if it might look like one. But it's a fun job. I love it.
Wait, so are there sales elements to this as well then?
Yeah.
Or is it more, we're still doing the same thing that, like, so if I'm a CISO, I'm doing the same thing as I was doing, but now I'm just zoning in on, would this ever have solved my problem in the years that I've worked in CISO? Is that how I would look at this?
Absolutely. So I do that. And then, if I'm having a conversation with somebody and they're like, yeah, we're in cloud and I'm really worried about it. I'm like, oh, hey, maybe, interested in hearing about Orca. And if they're like, no, I'm like, great, I'm done. And if they're like, what is that? I'm like, I keep these 1 paragraphs in a Google Doc. And so here's the 1 paragraph description of this company. So they can say, oh, yeah, I'm interested in them. Can you introduce me? And maybe they're on a vulnerability management kick. And I'm like, oh, let me tell you about Vulcan. Or they're an IoT manufacturer worrying about supply chain and their bill of materials. And I can say, oh, let me tell you about Karamba. And so there's just a little piece of it. I'm not on a quota. So if somebody says no, I'm not hurt.
Yeah.
Look, I know these companies. And if you're interested, I'll make an introduction. If you're not, it's fine. It's sort of the flip of, as a CISO, what I hated was people wouldn't take a no. Like most sales conversations end in a no. And so you just recognize that if the goal is to get to a no, then get to a no as fast as you possibly can. And if you can't get to the no, that means there's probably a yes there. The problem is people who do it the opposite. They're trying to get to a yes, but they can't get there, and they don't recognize that means that there's really a no under the covers.
Interesting. I know we've been talking about CISO and the trajectory from CISO into a VC for some for about a good 45 minutes now, and I do there is something that I do in the end, which is a fun question. So this is we're under the last segment of our conversation now. There are 3 fun questions, which are just 3 questions just to get to know you a bit more. And I'll just start going through one of the questions because I haven't told you about them before. So what do you spend most time on when you're not working on technology?
Ooh, that's a really interesting one, because I read a lot. So I will tell you that I was recently introduced to the lit RPG style of writing, which is people who write novels based inside RPG. So like the characters are like live inside an MMO and they know it.
Oh, right.
Like I have to tell you that some of them are fantastic and some of them are, oh my God, awful. A lot of self-published authors, some of them who probably shouldn't, who are fantastic. Like, and it's been a fun thing. So I spend a lot of time reading. I'm a wine collector, so I'm do quite a lot of that. I have a drinking problem in that I do not drink nearly as fast as I buy. So we're getting close to having to buy another wine refrigerator. So we're having that conversation.
Fair enough. Yes.
And I'm a parent, so I spend a lot of time with my kids. So actually, I spend a lot less time now than I used to because they're both teenagers.
Yeah, fair enough.
Although
now they have their own life.
As a parent, I got to say, COVID, I was the first generation of parents to be happy to have teenagers. Mine were like, nope, we want nothing to do with you. My day was not like being a babysitter to my children because they were pretty much fine.
Fair enough. This gets a great answer as well. So second question, what is something that you're proud of but is not on your social media?
I'm proud of that isn't on. See, I'm really good at bragging. So a lot of the stuff that I'm proud of, I'm like, I'm going to put it out there just so that people will know it. See, because I had one yesterday. I did not knock over the 4 Red Sox trophies, which I almost did yesterday.
Really?
I was at the baseball game, and they brought them into the suite that we were in, and you had to like walk behind them to take a picture. But the tablecloth that they were on wasn't tucked underneath, and so it wrapped around my ankle as I was walking by. I almost yanked them right off. I did not, so I'm very proud of the fact that I successfully didn't.
Wow. Wow. Okay, that would definitely be like a YouTube viral moment, I imagine.
Well, the funniest thing was, it's like, so I'm terrified. The 3 security folks are all like, you can see they're completely ashen. And the first comment somebody made was, damn, I wish I'd had the video out. Because I basically go flying because I'm not letting my foot pull this as soon as I feel it. So I went flying. I did not get hurt. So I'm proud of the fact that I didn't get hurt while doing it either. So I'll go with that. There's probably something I'll think of in an hour and I'll be like, I wish I'd said this. And I'll put it on social media, and then it will no longer be a thing I'm proud of that isn't on social media.
What? Never. Well, better today than never, I guess. What's the last one? What's your favorite cuisine or restaurant that you can share?
Ooh, that's hard. I love food. Food is fantastic. That said, since I just came back from Israel, I will go with recency bias. And I will tell you that I had hummus at Abu Hassan in Yafo, and it was nice. Amazing. Like, just to be clear, if you could buy hummus in the United States, it was nothing like hummus anywhere else in the Middle East. Where it's still warm, it's creamier, usually has more tahina. So that's, and if you want to make it in the States, I highly recommend the recipe from the Zahav cookbook for hummus tahina. It's fantastic.
All right. I will definitely take a note of that. I'll probably take some pointers on Israel as well, the kind of food, because I've definitely been a fan of the food as well for some time. So
yeah. Food there is amazing just across the board. Like, it's not just the Mediterranean cuisine, but since I was there, I'll go with the traditional Mediterranean.
I appreciate that. But that was the last question as well. So I'm sure people would have want to be in touch with you and get to know a bit more about yourself and how maybe some Israeli companies can have conversations with you, or maybe even non-Israeli companies, and get your insight on them as well. Where can people find you online?
Probably the easiest place is Twitter. I'm CSO Andy on Twitter. Also, my website is csoandy.com. I'm more active on LinkedIn now than I used to be. So you can sometimes find me there as well.
Perfect. I'll leave those links in the show notes as well. But thank you so much for coming on board and sharing all the experiences that you've had over the years and what you're doing now as well.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciated it, and it was a great time.
Thank you. All right, everyone. I will see you on next week. Well, actually, this weekend's episode where we are covering bug bounty, but from a different perspective. Maybe dark stories from the internet. That's a hint for this weekend's episode. I'll see you all there. Enjoy the day. Yeah.